Welcome back. It is Power Rankings time. Saturday night for me. It's Sunday when you're watching this. And I'll just repeat again that the reason that I've made it so these post Sunday mornings instead of Saturday nights is because the review videos I was doing on Saturday night were performing really, really poorly this season and last season too. And so by spacing out between the review and the Power Rankings, it gives the review more of a chance to get more views before the Power Rankings come out and everybody skips over to that. I know there were people that watched both, but this is something that I wanted to do to see if that would help the other video, and it does. All right, so this week there's a lot of movement, and Saturday night's games, well, the all-day games on Saturday just didn't make this easier. Number 32 this week, dropping 2 spots from last week, is San Jose. San Jose's back down to the bottom where they started the season. We'll see how long they stay there, but their play has definitely dropped off. Young players hit that wall, and I think that's part of what's going on, is when you get into January, and these are called the dog days of the season, and clearly they are. Teams are very busy, but you see that inconsistent effort from teams at the top, like tonight. Almost every team in the top row lost tonight. Like, it's just ridiculous. And a lot of teams in the bottom 2 rows got victories tonight. So San Jose was not one of those teams that got a victory and ends up in last place. Number 31, also dropping 2 spots from last week, Buffalo. That's a brand new puck, and I figured, Sabretooth's kind of a fun mascot, and I could use a mascot puck for Buffalo. I can think of various times that I would probably use the mascot puck. So, yeah, Buffalo's 31st this week. Dropping a couple of spots. Would have been last, but San Jose is getting victories at a slower rate than Buffalo is right now. All right, so number 30 this week, moving up 1 spot from last week, is Chicago. The Blackhawks, they've had a couple of victories. I think they finished the week with 2 wins in a row. They seem to be finding their identity. They're definitely playing better under Sorensen than they were under Richardson. They're not getting a lot of victories out of it, but they're definitely playing better. Bedard's playing better. Mrazek had an excellent game tonight against the Vegas Golden Knights. We'll see if that propels Chicago to more victories and, if they start moving up the overall standings at least a little bit. But for right now, they're still technically last in the league, I do believe. I know they're close to San Jose, but I think they're still last place. But maybe they're ready to pull themselves out of last place. Number 29, dropping 2 spots from last week, Anaheim. They're just getting shut out too much. This is a team that when they struggle to score, it's just the well is dry. There is no offense there. So, yeah, the Anaheim Ducks down to number 29 this week. And we'll see in coming weeks whether or not they move their way up. I'll be down in California in a few weeks. Please don't hold it against me. But yeah, Anaheim down to 29th this week. Number 28, moving up 4 spots from last week, Nashville. Now, I don't know if Nashville can take that win tonight over Minnesota and, start to string some wins together. We've been waiting for that all season. It hasn't happened to this point. For Nashville, yeah, they're not on one of the. Oh, they are too. They're 6 games below NHL 500 still. Yeah, it's not happening for them this season, but they're still winning enough games that if Barry Trotz really believes that this team can turn it around next season, there are definitely some indicators that maybe that might be the case with the right moves in the offseason. But this season definitely looks like it's just not going to happen. Number 27, dropping 3 spots from last week, the Islanders. There was some hope for the Islanders last week, but honestly, the Islanders, they lost a couple of games. They did beat San Jose tonight, but San Jose's down here in 32nd, so it doesn't bump the Islanders up. They're just not winning often enough. That 3-game winning streak is kind of forgotten now. And I don't know what the plan is going to be with the Islanders at the deadline or going into next season. But the Islanders this season just it looks like it won't happen for the Islanders, keeping in mind that things in the East and the West are still up in the air enough that I can't really write off the Islanders at this stage. Number 26, also dropping 3 spots from last week, is Vancouver. They win on Saturdays. They beat Toronto last Saturday. They beat Edmonton tonight by the skin of their teeth. The Vancouver Canucks are interesting because outside of that game against the Oilers tonight, they looked hopeless the rest of the week. And they looked hopeless the rest of the week before until that game against Toronto. I just couldn't move them up tonight. The teams that they would have passed tonight, I didn't feel like they belonged ahead of at this point. So Vancouver 26th. I really hope they turn it around. Like last season, there were weeks that Vancouver was number one, and that was great to have them at number one. And it has not happened for them this season. And I definitely did not have them in the bottom row at all last season. So we'll see how long Vancouver's down there for. Number 25, also dropping 3 spots last week, but they won tonight, and it's Seattle. So another team that's won less than half of their games, and they win tonight. They win a big game tonight, so their fans will come over to the power rankings saying, I wonder how Seattle's done, but the rest of the week was not great for them. So, yeah, Seattle's in the bottom row. We'll see how long they're in the bottom row for. But, yeah, that's how the bottom row shakes out this week. Again, just the chaos of January. Has to be the chaos of January. Number 24, moving up 4 spots from last week, the Flyers. Why? Because they're 4-0-1 in their last 5. The Flyers do not play the most exciting style of hockey. I think that John Tortorella understands that in order for them to win games, it has to be low event hockey. They have to really minimize the shots against. And they did that today against New Jersey. It's not the most exciting hockey to watch. It is not. And it is very frustrating for the other team because Philadelphia doesn't really attack so much. They counterattack, but most of the game they're, kind of, I don't want to say sitting back because it makes it sound like they're really passive, but the style of hockey they play is designed to just make sure teams aren't getting shots. Number 23, moving up 2 spots from last week, the New York Rangers. 7-game point streak for the New York Rangers. So this is where I couldn't move the Canucks up because Philadelphia 4-0-1 in their last 5. The Rangers points in their last 7 games. I cannot justify a Vancouver team being ahead of teams with those recent records just based on a Saturday night game against Edmonton. So, yeah, the Rangers 23 this week. And I say this knowing people just skip to the end and complain, but I do try my best to explain. So, yeah, the Rangers move up a couple of spots. They're out of the last row. I think the Rangers have a chance to, if 7-game point streak's not nothing, I think they have a chance to sneak in and end up getting a playoff spot anyways, even with all the tire fire stuff this year, which would be insane. Number 22, dropping 2 spots from last week, Pittsburgh. The Penguins right now are definitely falling in the wrong direction. Of course, falling isn't good when you're in the standings anyways, so I guess I could just say falling. The Pittsburgh Penguins, they get wins here and there. They aren't winning often enough to keep themselves that close to a playoff spot. So, in all honesty, looking at this, I'm thinking, yeah, you could justify the Rangers ahead of the Penguins if you're watching this. You absolutely could. And next week, I would not be surprised if the Rangers are ahead of the Penguins on this board. But they dropped 2 spots this week, not 3, just 2. Dropping 3 spots from last week, Utah. Well, they won tonight. They beat St. Louis, which just kind of made a mess of things. But for Utah, it's about consistency. We haven't seen that from them recently. With the win tonight, they get back to NHL 500. And so going forward, we'll see whether or not they can maintain that and maybe build upon it. But for right now, Utah just outside the top 20. Number 20 this week, dropping 4 spots from last week, Calgary. They lost the back-to-back games against St. Louis, which hurt them. I did mark them down for the second one, and then they beat Winnipeg. So, beat Edmonton, beat LA, beat Winnipeg. Yeah, so that's, and Philly beats New Jersey. Nashville beats Minnesota. Anaheim got a win over Florida this week. Chicago beats Vegas. It was kind of a good week for the teams at the bottom of the board, wasn't it? Eventually. Not necessarily the whole week, right? But Calgary drops down to 20th. They are still in a playoff spot. This is one of those things where if a team's in a playoff spot, do they have to be in the top 16? I have argued for the last 6 years, no. If a team is not playing as well as a team that's beneath them, they don't stay ahead of that team. And for Calgary, they got the win over Winnipeg tonight. It's a matter of building on that now, and we'll see if they can or if they can't. Because at number 19, moving up 7 spots from last week, and this is one of those market corrections, and that's St. Louis. So market correction is when a team is playing well, and I look at where they are on the board, and I say, I'm going to move them up. And that's what happened with St. Louis after that second win over Calgary, because I felt like they showed a lot of poise in the wins over Calgary. They looked really good. So I moved them up. And they rewarded me for moving them up by losing against Utah and looking terrible in the first period. But they looked good after that. So, right? We'll see if St. Louis maintains that spot going forward and if they move up this coming week, but they're the number one mover and thus the St. Louis garb that I am currently wearing. They move up to number 19. Number 18 this week, moving up 3 spots from last week, Detroit. Detroit tonight against Tampa, and Tampa's a tough team to defeat most nights anyways. Detroit is facing kind of sort of earlier in the season what they faced last year. It feels similar. Getting up close to that playoff spot and not quite jumping up, not quite getting into that spot. Are we going to see Detroit go through that in the second half of the season, or is tonight that's just a blip and they're going to continue on their way and have really good results in their next game? We shall see. But for the Detroit Red Wings, tough loss tonight against Tampa. I thought they played well in portions of that game. You got to focus on that and just throw away the rest of it. Number 17, dropping 2 spots from last week, Boston. The Bruins are officially below the playoff line now in the East. It took a while for them to get there, but they're officially below the playoff line. I don't know whether or not they're going to get back above it. The 2-goal lead they had against Ottawa, they frittered it away. What's interesting is they had a poor, I would say, the first 10 minutes against Ottawa, and then they had a lousy last 5 minutes against Ottawa in regulation. Outside of that, they played all right. So, yeah, Boston, it's a matter of consistency and playing that full 60 minutes. It just felt like once Ottawa was rolling, they just weren't able to stop them. So that's the bottom half of the board. The only team above the playoff line that's in the bottom half of the board is Calgary. So who's below the playoff line that's above the second half of the board? Number 16 on the board is Ottawa. Is Ottawa the one that's above the top 17? I'm going to go ahead and cheat. I'm going to pause. I'm going to look. Ottawa's above the line. As soon as I look at the standings, I'm like, right, yeah, that's the one that's below the playoff line that's moved up a lot. So Ottawa moves up 1 spot from last week. They're now 16th on the board. The win over Boston made that easy. Made it easy for me to just switch some spots. And I did feel like Ottawa showed a lot of fight with coming back and tying it up and then getting the win. So, yeah, Ottawa ends up moving up into the top 16 this week, which they were in the top 16 up until last week, actually. They go from 16 to 17, now back up to 16. So, yeah, just staying about steady. Number 15, moving up 4 spots from last week, Columbus. Even with the shootout loss tonight, you know what? They're 8-2-1 in their last 11 games. Columbus has played well. And that game against the Rangers, it wasn't boring, considering there wasn't a score in it. I didn't find the game boring. There was a lot of games on at the same time tonight, so I was scrolling around and trying to catch up as much as I could. But I thought Columbus played pretty well, considering the Rangers are playing pretty well too. Columbus has a playoff spot right now. We'll see if they end up staying in it. I will mention again, ever since that game against Montreal, where there was this whole, Columbus doesn't fight that hard to be in the playoffs. Columbus are losers, and they accept losing. They have not accepted losing. They've decided losing is not good for them. So, yeah, Columbus has been a lot of fun to watch. Number 14, dropping 1 spot from last week, Tampa. Hurt by the game against Boston, helped by the game against Detroit, and they almost stay in the same spot. So they get passed by one team. Tampa Bay, 14th on the board this week, and you never know what you're going to get from one game to the next with them. But in the playoffs, they're going to be very difficult. I have no doubt Tampa Bay is going to make the playoffs. None. And in the playoffs, I think they're going to be a little bit of a tougher out this year than they were last season. I think there's some determination there when it comes to playoffs, but we'll see, right? Number 13, dropping 5 spots from last week. 5, New Jersey. Yeah, it was a rough week for the Devils. They had the loss against Toronto, which was an entertaining game, and Luke Hughes ends up hitting the crossbar, and then it doesn't work out for them. But today's game against Philly, that really hurt them. They just didn't generate chances. Philly played well defensively. I'm not trying to take anything away from Philly here, but that's a game New Jersey needs to win. You're at home. You need to win that game. So for the New Jersey Devils, things are definitely trending in the wrong direction. And the good news being that they had enough points with their start to the season. They don't really have to worry about being outside of the playoffs, at least not yet. With teams getting better, like Columbus, the Rangers, and various other teams, they better get it together soon. Number 12 this week, dropping 2 spots from last week, Minnesota. For the Wild, the loss against Nashville hurt them, and this is where if there's one comment I see every week about where Minnesota is in the overall standings and how dare you have them lower, which reminds me there are people who don't understand that power rankings are supposed to measure how a team is playing right now, and the overall standings do not necessarily tell you who's playing well right now. The example I would give you is, I think, it was on Sportsnet this week. They were asking, okay, name the top 3 teams in the NHL. And almost all of them had Florida, and the one that didn't was like, I should have put Florida. I'm thinking, right now, Florida is not. Now, if we're talking about come playoff time, I'm not betting against Florida. But for right now, Florida is not. And Minnesota right now is not playing like one of the top teams in the league. The injuries have hurt them. They got Faber back tonight. They need Kaprizov back. They need Brodin back. They need Spurgeon back. They need basically their superstar and the defense back. But for Minnesota, that loss against Nashville definitely hurt them tonight. Number 11, same spot as last week, Florida. The Florida Panthers, they did get the win today over Anaheim, but Anaheim played them pretty tough. They did. They just couldn't. They could not score on Spencer Knight, who I said in the review, I'll say it here. I think Knight's outplaying Bobrovsky. Knight might be the better goaltender right now, which leaves Paul Maurice in an interesting position because you want to get wins, right? So maybe Spencer Knight gets a couple extra starts here and there. His numbers have just been very good. We can talk about strength of opponent too. Sure. Yep, absolutely. Because anytime I talk about a backup goaltender playing well, the first comment will be, well, he plays against weaker teams, which fair, but still, Knight's putting up fantastic numbers. And Florida in the position that they're in, I think maybe giving Spencer Knight some more starts might be the right call. Number 10 this week, moving up 2 spots from last week, is Carolina. It's been shifts and starts for the Carolina Hurricanes, but they find themselves back in the top 10. I want to say it's been a while. However, week 12, they were in the top 10. It is now week 15 for anybody that's counting. And 26 weeks is how long the season runs, and that's how many power rankings that we end up getting are 26 weeks worth. I don't count the one before the season gets started. That's kind of like a week 0, just kind of here's the starting point. And Carolina is nowhere near the starting point. They were much higher than 10th. So maybe the second half of the season we'll see them rounding into form. That'd be kind of nice to see. Number 9 this week, same spot as last week, Dallas. They spent most of this week in the top row. And then they lost against Montreal. And they lost against Colorado. That loss against Colorado, they made it look closer than I think it really was. I think Colorado kind of manhandled them. So Dallas ends up in the same spot they were last Saturday. Even though at one point this week they were up as high as 6th. But yeah, they're back down to 9th by the time we get to Saturday. So that's the bottom 3 rows. There is a fan base right now that's saying, I think he forgot our puck. I did not. Number 8 this week, up 6 spots from last week, Montreal. So they had the 3-goal lead against Toronto and they lost it. To me, that was a young team that had a very good first period. And then the tide started to turn, and they didn't really adjust. Montreal seems to be more comfortable on those come-from-behind situations than they are playing with the lead. Which, with a young team, you can expect that. And there's a lot of young players there. But Montreal right now, they look like a playoff team. Even though they did get kind of manhandled a little bit in the second and third period tonight by Toronto, they've still looked like a playoff team for a long while now. So I'm perfectly fine with putting them in the top row because over the last month, they have been one of the best teams in the league, and it's been impressive to watch. I don't know if they're going to stay in the top row, but they're in the top row for the first time, I want to say, in at least half a decade. Because in 2021, they went to the Stanley Cup final, but during that season, they only won 24 out of 56 games. So they were not in the top row that year either. Number 7, moving down, I should say, 2 spots from last week, Toronto Maple Leafs. The Leafs, they lost, was it 3 or 4 in a row? And then they beat New Jersey, who have dropped down to here. And then they beat Montreal tonight, who are here. So Toronto stays in 7th spot tonight. That's where they committed tonight. And for the Toronto Maple Leafs, they're still first in the division. The losing streak doesn't seem to have overly hurt them. And that huge win tonight over Montreal, we'll see what they can do going forward about keeping that momentum going. But yeah, Toronto is still in the top row. They just dropped 2 spots from where they were last week. Number 6, And moving up one spot from last week is Colorado. The Avs, they did lose the 3-goal lead they had on Edmonton, which kept them from being higher than 6th. But I feel like 6th is the right spot. They bounced back. They got that 6-3 win today against Dallas. Impressive victory for them there. So yeah, 6th place for Colorado, I feel like is the right spot for them. So we move into the top 5. Number 5 on the board, down 3 spots from last week, is Vegas. Losing to the Islanders at home, losing to the Rangers at home, and then they seem to be turning it around going into tonight, and tonight they lose against Chicago. Now, maybe it's just overlooking the opponent. The problem is last night they lost against Carolina, so Vegas finds themselves 5th this week rather than higher up. They would have been 4th if they'd won that game over Carolina last night, but because they didn't, 4th this week, also dropping 3 spots from last week, the LA Kings. Kings did not have a stellar week, and then it ends with the loss against Seattle. So LA had a fantastic third period, but so did Joey Daccord, and so they don't get the comeback there. The LA Kings still playing very well. I think overall, just they dropped down to 4th this week from 1st last week. And right now there's Kings fans watching this and saying, see, we told you, don't put us 1st. I know, I remember, but they ended up 1st, so my bad. Number 3 this week, same spot as last week, Winnipeg. That's 2 weeks in a row they've been 3rd. 2 weeks ago they were 6th. The loss against Calgary kind of offsets that huge victory over Vancouver, and so they stay in 3rd spot this week. The Winnipeg Jets, still one of the best teams in the league. They just don't score when Comrie's in the net, and I don't get it. It's like, and I always say, well, Comrie's not that good. Comrie is fine as a backup. Backup goaltenders are never as good as the starter, at least not usually. You do have a 1A, 1B situation, but I'm talking about like when you have a guy who's going to play 60 games and one who's going to play 20 to 25, right? Or 55 to 60, 20 to 25. The guy who's playing 20 to 25 isn't as good as the guy who's going to play almost 60 games. But they need to play well in front of that guy. So I know Wolf stole it tonight, but the lack of goal support for Comrie is just, it's insane. Number 2 this week, moving up 4 spots from last week, Caps. Yep, Capitals are back. The win tonight over Pittsburgh was never really in doubt. They played that game very well, and they didn't need a goal from Ovechkin. Ovechkin's chase is what people focus on with the Capitals, but one thing to focus on with the Capitals too is they don't need goals from Ovechkin to win. All season, they've proven that. They do not have to get goals from Ovechkin to get victories, which was not always the case. So the Capitals have done a very good job of adapting. Logan Thompson had a shutout streak of, almost 180 minutes? So almost 3 full games. And the Caps are up to 2nd this week, which means 1st, moving up 3 spots from last week. I did not punish the Oilers for that loss tonight against Vancouver because, gosh darn it, they almost came back and tied it. They did. They almost came back and tied it. And with the 3-goal deficit that they faced against Colorado and they came back and won it, Edmonton's won 7 of their last 9. They're playing very well. They lost tonight against Vancouver. But if I was going to punish teams that lost tonight, the top row would be a bloodbath, wouldn't it? Basically, if I punish teams that lost tonight. So anyways, just Saturday night, I just look at that and I go, yeah, it's the dog days of January. These things can happen. That's why I didn't use the shock llama on any of those games either, because I'm like, yeah, it's January. It's kind of what happens in January. This is the time of year that I find people pay less attention to hockey in the NHL, and then they get more interested when we get to the trade deadline and beyond. But this is the time of the season when we start to see the team that's going to win the Stanley Cup playing really, really well. Usually the team that wins the Stanley Cup has a very good second half of the season rolling into the playoffs. So just one of those things to keep in the back of your mind. But let me know your thoughts in the comment section below as always. And I know people are just going to skip to the end and they're just going to, I can't believe this team's in this spot. I explain the whole way through. But hey, it's the internet. Let me know your thoughts. Hit like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. Thank you guys so much for all your support as always. I will talk to you again soon.